Hello and welcome back to What's My Making, where I'm Millie, and this is a space where I talk about the past, present, and future of my making, mostly knitting. Today's video is Knitting Podcast, episode 16. It's been almost 2 months since I recorded a podcast, so there's a decent amount of stuff to talk about. I haven't been knitting as much because it's just been super stupid hot and I went on vacation. So I do have some finished objects and WIPs, plus some acquisitions from my vacation, plus I've thrifted yarn for the first time ever. And then at the end of the video, I will have a section on my sewing because I've really been bitten by the sewing bug, and I feel like summer is kind of the perfect time to get into sewing, and I totally foresee that continuing through the summer. And bonus, I finally learned how to crochet. I have literally been trying to crochet every single summer since I first started knitting, and I'm happy to say that I finally did it. So I do have one crochet WIP, and not in this video, but hopefully my next video will be a summer knitting plans video, even though we're like halfway through summer. Don't even get me started on that. But it'll probably be summer knitting plans, and then I'll throw in some crochet, and I'll talk more about that at the end of the video. So without further ado, let's just get into finished objects. And I only really have one fully finished proper sweater, and it's not even like 100% finished, but I'm counting it for this video. This is the Harriet sweater by Knit, and as you can see from like the dangly bits, it's not 100% finished because I have woven in all of the ends. However, I have not blocked it because by the time I finished it, it was just way too warm to wear it, and I didn't feel like blocking it and then packing it away and then having to wash it again before I wear it in the fall. So it's just kind of been like sitting with my knitting things. And once it starts to get a little bit cooler, or if we just have like a random, like sometimes there's like a few days where it just drops into the 60s, maybe I will feel the urge to block this. And it's also not 100% finished because I did the same modification that I've been doing all this year whenever I knit a sweater construction where I have to put the sleeve stitches on hold. Instead of picking up for the underarm, I just cast on stitches. So there is this giant hole, which I will be seaming up after I block it. So let's talk a little bit more about the sweater. I'm fairly certain it was a WIP in the previous video. I haven't podcasted in so long. I need to see my notes for the construction, modifications, overall thoughts on the pattern. So this is a top-down construction. It has a contiguous sleeve construction. So I think I've talked about this many times, but the best way I find to describe a contiguous sleeve construction is that the yoke really mimics like the shape of your body, how it goes straight and then like curves along the underarms. And that's just how this works. And one thing I really like about this construction, it fits really well. And also you do join in the round eventually. So while there is part of the yoke is knit flat, all of the color work is knit after you have it joined in the round. And the contiguous sleeve construction I've found can be done multiple different ways. And maybe I'll make a video on that at some point. But this way was one, I don't remember if I've done this before. I think in previous podcasts I said I've never seen this type of contiguous construction. But like the more I thought about it, I thought maybe I have, but I don't remember. Anyways, this one is done where you start off in a way that's very similar to a drop shoulder construction in that you cast on for your back shoulders, you knit the back yoke, pick up right shoulder, pick up left shoulder, pick up right shoulder, join in the round. So that's the way this yoke is done. And then you have your color work. The color work on this is so easy. There's a few charts. All of them have short repeats. I don't really think I had to catch floats except maybe on a few of the rows in this flower motif. But besides from that, I would say honestly, like the color work is easy breezy on this sweater. I know I previously had wanted to knit the porcelain sweater, and I feel like it's a pretty popular sweater on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, and I've seen a lot of people complain about that sweater. I don't know if it's like the color work motifs or the way that it's written. I have the pattern, but I don't think I've really given it a good look. So I will say if that pattern is overly complicated, I personally found this pattern to be fairly straightforward. I think in the yoke, there were like some minor mistakes, but if you have ever knit a sweater before and you kind of just like go off your muscle memory, you'll realize that those are mistakes. And I'm pretty certain I denoted them in my Ravelry project notes. If that is of help. And yeah, I just really like the style of the sweater. Like, it uses these fairly traditional motifs, but in a design that I think looks a little bit more modern. I'm trying to think of any modifications I did. I know I did shorten the sweater by a lot because my goal was to have a similar amount of negative space. Is that the term I'm trying to use? I think like positive ease. No, I'm fairly certain it's called negative ease. I wanted an equal amount of like plain knitting, let's just say that, on the top as on the bottom. And the way that the pattern is written, you knit this bottom plain section way longer. And I don't know, I just didn't think that looked as balanced. Plus, I'm significantly shorter than the designer. I'm only 5'1", so I think it would have just ended up looking like a sweater dress if I knit it to the length in the pattern. The only other like very minor modification I did, I'm fairly certain the way that the charts are written, you're supposed to continue the color work in this sort of like raglan stitch. It's where you're increasing for your body and sleeves. I just decided to skip that because it wasn't like a cognizant decision. I just never do the color work when I'm knitting a raglan, so I just assumed. I never do the color work on the raglan stitch when I'm knitting a color work raglan, so I kind of assumed the same thing would happen in a contiguous sleeve construction. And I don't think I like analyzed the pictures to see if the designer did that or not, but I feel like if I did continue the color work in the raglan stitch, it would look a little bit out of place. Like, it would disrupt that clean raglan delineation you get. It honestly has been so long since I've knit the yoke that I don't 100% remember all my thoughts, but you can check my previous podcast episode where I do talk more in depth about the yoke construction of this sweater. As for the yarn, this yarn was a total treat to use. It was gifted to me by Kelborn Woolens because I am part of their affiliate program. It is their it's still new, but it's like several months old at this point. But it is their newest Germantown base. It's Germantown DK. So it is made using US wool and it is milled in the US. So like start to finish, it's all made in the US, which I think is really cool. And for the price point, I feel like in general, wool that is made domestically in the US tends to be a little bit pricier, but I feel like the Germantown line has a very reasonable price point. The DK weight, the worsted version, and the bulky weight version, I believe, are all under $20. And because I am an affiliate, if you use my code Millie, you will get 10% off, making it an even better price point. The stitch definition of this yarn is so freaking crisp. I have not blocked the sweater, but I feel like my color work still looks so crisp and clean. I'm obsessed with it. I would totally use this sweater for more color work projects again, especially as I am contemplating what I want my Rhinebeck sweater to be, and hopefully we'll be casting it on within the next month-ish or so. I think, as always with my sweater knitting plans, I would like to use majority stash yarn, but I do think I'm thinking of making a gray sweater for Rhinebeck, and I don't have any gray yarn. So I've been looking at their Germantown DK in the gray color as well as their Scout yarn, but that's for another video. All that to say, I would totally use this yarn for color work again because the stitch definition is so crisp and sharp and nice. I used 3 different colors. The main color is cocoa, and then the color work, I chose 2 different low contrast colors. I'm unsure how well it's showing up on camera, but I used I think it's like light pink or baby pink color and the lilac color. Interestingly enough, the sample sweater for this pattern, neither of them use 2 colors. And I remember looking at all the project pages, I'm like, wow, people are so innovative. Everybody seems to be using 2 colors. And then I got the pattern and I saw, wait, the pattern actually tells you to do 2 colors. If you are wondering how you know like which color goes where, if you wanted to use 2 colors, the pattern has that information. But of course, you can also use a single color if that tickles your fancy. I foresee this being one of the first sweaters I wear in a podcast episode, and just wear in general once it gets cool enough, because I just really like it. And I'm sure I will like it even more after it is blocked. So that's my only real finished garment project. I do have one other that I don't have with me because it was a gift knit, and I'll insert it on the screen like a picture my friend took. So I modified the Metropolitan pullover to be like this little shruggy for my friend, and the main modifications I did is I did not join the neckline. Instead, I kept knitting it flat because I wanted it to be a little shruggy. And then after I reached the point where I was going to be putting these sleeve stitches on hold, I put the sleeve stitches on hold and then I worked some short rows to drop the back a little bit lower because I wanted it to be the shape of like commercially made shruggies. I know a few years ago Marc Jacobs Heaven collection had one, and just before I was making this project I did make like a little mood board. I don't remember if I saved the mood board or not, but if I saved it I will insert it on the screen. When I'm looking for knitwear inspiration that is maybe not like something plain, I really like looking at the sites that curate like from different luxury brands. Like Essence is great for looking for inspiration, Net-a-Porter, Moda Operandi, Farfetch, Matches. Is Matches still around? I don't remember, but anyways, all those like luxury sites I feel like are excellent for just giving, I don't want to say it's out of the box, but giving all sorts of knitwear inspiration. Even if you want like a plain knitwear inspiration, like brands like Totem and Kate are great for providing that. So yeah, that's my little spiel on this cardigan. Oh, and then I also decided to do a contrast color edging and like button band, partly because I was running out of my main color yarn. I also decided to do like a blanket stitch edging because I really like the way that looks on some ready to wear pieces that I've seen. And that was interesting because when I was looking for YouTube tutorials, it was not very straightforward, but I finally figured it out and I really, really like the way that it turned out. So the main color yarn that I used is this Juniper Moon Farms Cotton Merino. It is a blown yarn construction and I used 2 balls of it in this green color. And then for all like the ribbing, the button band, no ribbing for the I-cord bind off, the button band, and the blanket stitch, I used this yarn from Queensland, which was another purchase from the New Jersey WIP. And this is again I believe it's a lamb's wool and cotton blend. This yarn feels so nice. If you are looking for a cotton wool blend that is maybe not knitting for olive, cotton merino, I feel like that's the most popular option. Really check this one out. It is a sport weight as opposed to the knitting for olive, which is a fingering weight, which can be a plus or minus, and it's quite affordable. I want to say the ball, it's a 50-gram ball for $8. It comes in mostly pastel colors. I really, really loved the hand feel of knitting with it. Like while I was knitting with it, it feels vastly different from the 100% cotton yarns that I've knit with in the past. The reason I don't enjoy knitting with 100% cotton yarns is that it just has no give and my hands start to hurt very, very quickly because you just don't have that same elasticity as when you are knitting with like a wool or an alpaca or really like any sort of animal fiber. But this yarn I would 100% knit with again. I was very, very tempted to purchase not a sweater quantity, but like a top quantity of it. Honestly, I would even like knit like a summer cardigan with it. My knitting plans is, despite the fact that it's like the middle of July, summer knitting plans are still up in the air. That is that finished object, and then I only have one other finished object because I just haven't been knitting as much. That's okay. I have my first ever stuffed animal, and this is Miffy. This is Miffy that I knit following the Saski and Co pattern. Isn't she so freaking cute? I did modify the pattern a lot because I have seen like boucle Miffys in different like souvenir stores and stuff. I feel like in Amsterdam they have Miffy everywhere because Miffy is Dutch, and she's just like been on my mind since then. So I did modify this quite a bit because the ratios, like the shaping of the Miffy in the pattern is quite different from the shaping of the Miffy, like Miffy, official Miffy, if you want to say. It was very, very easy to make. I'm pretty sure I made her like within a day or two over a long weekend. And I just used this like random Berroco yarn that I had got as a freebie. So the total cost for this project was $0 because the black yarn also came from like my scrap little tin that I had. In terms of the pattern, I'm unsure if I would recommend the pattern. It's very inexpensive, so if you just want to buy it to give it a try, like it doesn't hurt. But I feel like the most complicated parts were not included in the instructions, and there's no gauge given. So I feel like it's one thing if a pattern has It's said to be gaugeless because you can modify the gauge to be whatever you want. Like if you're knitting a blanket, technically the gauge is not important because it can be whatever you want it to be, but they still give you a standard gauge so that you can get the same measurement as the designer. Whereas in this pattern, there was no gauge given. So even if you were to follow the pattern, if your like row gauge and your stitch gauge had a different ratio than the designer, it's going to greatly affect the shape of your final piece. So I wish that was given. And then also like it didn't tell you how you are supposed to seam the ears on to the body. It didn't really give you instructions on how to do like the face. I had to look that up on YouTube. And I wrote in my project notes like, oh, I mattress stitched this part, I kitchen stitched that part, and I tried to include like the tutorials that I followed. So overall, it's a very inexpensive pattern, but I personally don't know if it's worth it. Especially because after I purchased the pattern, I looked up and there are some really, really cute Miffy patterns for free on Ravelry, knit and crochet. I will say if you want to use like a boucle yarn, maybe then get this Miffy pattern. But if you want to use a standard yarn, there's this one like Miffy doll pattern that is so adorable, and you could totally modify it that it's only her head and you have like this cute little keychain. I can foresee myself knitting that Miffy pattern in the future. All that said, complaints aside, I still think this Miffy is very, very cute and I'm not mad about her. One side is definitely funnier looking than the other side. I put like this little bow bead on the keychain so I know like which is like the better looking side. I also, yes, I also, what's it called? Flipped it inside out. So this is the pearl side because I just thought with the yarn that I was using, the pearl side looked better. That is a wrap on finished objects, and let's move into WIPs. I've been knitting a lot of cardigans. As I said, this is basically like the summer of cardigans for me. I've just been knitting cardigans only, really. So my first cardigan is from my spring knitting plans. I don't remember if I mentioned I wanted to knit this cardigan or if I wanted to knit the Olga jacket with the same yarn. Basically, I think before I cast on the Olga jacket, I was looking through my Ravelry pattern library to see if I had anything similar. And I had this pattern that I purchased, I want to say 2 years ago. I purchased it when it came out, I'm fairly certain, and I just never knit it and completely forgot about it. So I decided to knit it instead. This is the JNP cardigan by Albiana McLaughlin. The designer's name will be on the screen, and it's this really, really pretty garter stitch cardigan. I generally don't love the look of garter stitch, especially in garments, but I think the striping really works in its favor and it doesn't look as garter stitchy, if that makes sense. So this is a bottom-up construction, aka my least favorite type of garment construction, but it all worked out. You do start off with the ribbing, and thankfully there is very little ribbing, and then you knit the body, put some stitches on hold for the sleeves, and you knit the yoke separately. I did shorten the yoke considerably only because I know garter stitch has a tendency to grow. And when I was looking through people's project notes, there was like one or two people who mentioned that their armhole ended up being too deep. One thing I really, really liked about this pattern is that there's a very detailed schematic. So it tells you exactly like what the upper arm circumferences would be, what the yoke depth is supposed to be, what the body length is supposed to be, and even more measurements. So I was able to basically shorten it a little bit just because I know, like I said, when I block it, it will stretch out. And another thing I really like in the pattern is the way that the short rows and seaming are written. So you work short rows to shape the top of the shoulders, and then you mattress stitch it, and look how cleanly these stripes line up. Like it just looks so clean. It's very, very simple to do. I know sometimes stripes in garter stitch can be kind of funky and leave you with like lumpy stitches, but I just think this looks so clean and it's very well described in the pattern. And overall, I've purchased several of this designer's patterns, but I just have never gotten around to knitting them. But I totally see myself knitting more and purchasing more in the future because she has a very like clean and classic sense of style. So the yarn that I used for this, I'm using 2 fingering weight yarns. because I have so much fingering weight yarn in my stash and I'm holding them each double. The brown is a Moondrake Cormo fingering, which is a Corriedale Merino blend in the espresso colorway. And then the blue is a non-superwash Merino fingering from Coast to Coast Yarn Co. It's from the Mushroom Collection, and I can't remember the color name off the top of my head, but it's a really, really pretty like blue color that's kind of like leaning greenish. And it's very interesting when these colors are paired together, how they bring out certain undertones. Because I feel like because this blue has a green undertone paired with the brown, it makes the brown look more greenish. The reason I was complaining is this is completely my own fault, but there were several times where I was knitting and I was knitting with the 2 strands, and there would be a stitch where I would only pick up 1 strand, and then it leaves this like really ugly ladder on the fabric, and I've just found 2 of them on the back yoke. The good thing is the way that this pattern is written, you do not cast off the stitches for the ribbing, you leave them on hold. So I technically still have live stitches, which means I will have to go down and fix these ladders because they're really ugly and they're bothering me, and I have the live stitches to fix them, so I might as well fix them. Let me see if we can come up close and you can see what I'm talking about. See, like right there? Isn't that so ugly? I can't believe I didn't notice it until now. Because there were several times during this project where I had to ladder down and fix it. I will say generally I was thinking of modifying it and binding off the stitches before doing the ribbing because I just think it creates a more stable fabric. But I will now see it as a blessing in disguise because I have the live stitches to ladder down and fix the drop stitches. It is one of them is quite far down, but it's like really gonna bother me if I don't fix it. So that is this cardigan. Next up, I have to knit the sleeves, and the pattern includes directions for knitting them in the round as well as directions for knitting them flat and then seaming it. I do not care to knit garter stitch in the round, so I will be knitting it flat and seaming it. This project, I think, has been on the needles the longest out of all my WIPs because I just haven't been like actively working on it, but when I am, it's like a nice chill project. I will say though, because I'm using the 2 strands of fingering weights held double, it's not a project that I can really knit on while not looking at it. Like, I really like taking my knitting to the movies and just like knitting without looking at what I'm doing. It's just like in the dark, it's very calm, keeps my hands occupied. However, when I tried to take this to the movie theater, I gave up within like 30 minutes because I just kept on dropping one of the strands. And I have been on projects with mohair because I remember when I watched Wicked last year, I went to Wicked 3 times and I was able to finish 2 sleeves within those 3 viewings. And I just remember I would like miss the mohair occasionally, but it wasn't as bad as this. And I think when you're missing the mohair, I guess it's just like not as visible. But that is the only downside of knitting with 2 strands of fingering. To be honest, I do think I prefer knitting with a single strand of DK versus 2 strands of fingering, but I'm using what I have. And 2 strands of fingering I also feel like is quite a bit plumper than using a single strand of DK. Like, my gauge on this is definitely looser than what the pattern states. So that is cardigan number 1. Cardigan number 2 and cardigan number 3 are both self-drafted. So like I said, I've really been into knitting cardigans, and I feel like I was just looking on Ravelry and I just couldn't find a cardigan for exactly what I was looking for. Either they were just heavier weight, or they just had like additional details that I really wasn't interested in, or they didn't have the shoulder construction I wanted. Like, I didn't want cables, I didn't want lace, I didn't want it to be with mohair at like an Aran weight gauge, because actually I could totally knit those sorts of cardigans in the future, but I just wanted something on the lighter side, mohair free. So here is my first self-drafted cardigan. This is with a contiguous sleeve construction. And before I started knitting this, I basically wrote out a list of all the different features that I wanted in a cardigan. Contiguous sleeve construction was number 1. I wanted it to be top down. I wanted it to have a high crew neck. I wanted it to steek it. I wanted to have relatively fitted sleeves. I wanted it to have a double knit button band, as well as a few rows of double knitting before doing the collar, which I haven't gotten around to knitting yet. And I think that was my list of requirements. So this cardigan was born, and it's actually been such a fun process. And because I haven't really been knitting anything complicated, I feel like going over, like creating this for myself kind of scratched that itch that maybe like a complicated color work or cable pattern would do in other times. Honestly, just like made me understand sweater construction even more so. So this starting point was a little bit difficult. I did like cast on and rip it out about 3 different times because I just like wasn't liking the way it was fitting, but it wasn't for nothing because each time I ripped it out, I learned something more. As far as the contiguous sleeve construction goes, the most helpful resource I found. So when I was first looking, people were saying like contiguous sleeve is a relatively new construction because I had checked out a few books from my local library on sweater construction and just like none of them were talking about contiguous sleeve construction. Then I found on Reddit that there is a Ravelry page. It's a pattern that you download, but it's not actually a pattern. It's more like a set of instructions and guidelines. It's Contiguous by Susie Myers, and I will link it down in the description box. And it's, on one hand, it is quite bare bones because if you follow that to a T, you still have to do your own measurements, and also it will just give you like a shoulder with a square neck. Like there's no neckline shaping. You will not get it will not fit you to the bust because you have to do like additional shaping to get it to fit you. At its core, it basically just very explicitly explains how a contiguous sleeve construction works. And it honestly was such a great resource in my opinion. And it made me really understand contiguous sleeve construction. Because I remember the first time I knit the Toronto sweater, I was so confused. Like I was following the directions. I was like, I don't understand why I'm increasing in this part here and then I'm not increasing in the next section, but then I'm increasing in both sections at first. Like it just didn't make sense to me. It all came together in the end, don't get me wrong, but I just didn't understand the why in the same way that when I'm knitting a raglan, like I understand why I'm doing what I'm doing because it's very clearly easy to see why. So I guess since we're talking about contiguous sleeve construction, I can just explain it to you now. So the way that it works, you start off with casting on stitches for your back neck. And the first part of a contiguous sleeve construction is you are basically just knitting straight out to, you are knitting your shoulders basically. So the top of your shoulders are flat and you are knitting straight out. Then you reach a point towards the end of your shoulders. I believe the pattern says like she uses the outer part of her bra strap. And then at that point, you take your shoulder stitches and they're increased to be your sleeve stitches. And it increases into being your sleeve stitches. And I'm fairly certain that's where the pattern ends. I think it gives you recommendations on how to measure certain parts of your body to figure out like how many stitches you would need with your gauge, but that is like at its core what the contiguous sleeve construction is. But that doesn't account for your neckline, and I realized later on, even if I continued increasing it for my sleeve, I wouldn't get the full body stitches. So basically, there are a few different sections in the contiguous sleeve construction. First, you are increasing for your shoulders. You're doing the top of your shoulders. Then you start increasing for your sleeves, and after a few rows simultaneously, you also start increasing for your neckline. And one thing I learned is that you cannot immediately start increasing for your neckline because that does not take into account your shoulders. There's another really good blog post I found that I will link in my description that talks about how you shape necklines in sweaters, and it explains that very well, how if you like start shaping the neckline immediately, I think it will cause like a hump in the back of the sweater, which I've definitely had previously. So after you are shaping the neckline and the sleeves, you reach some sort of point where your neckline is done being shaped. And if you were working this as a pullover, you would cast on stitches to join both sides and join in the round. And in my case, because I was knitting this as a cardigan, I did join it in the round, but I joined it in the round with some steek stitches, which I decided to do as purl stitches because it is easier to then reinforce the steek on the wrong side, in my opinion, and it's easier to see like visually where I'm going to cut. Talking about it was not too chaotic. I just remember being so excited when it like finally clicked for me how the contiguous sleeve construction works and how I could get this sweater construction to work for me. It was just like an exciting light bulb moment. And there were some parts that this, if it was a contiguous sleeve pattern, it was like another blog post I found, because there was also a part where I was working like very rapid increases, which I don't think I've done in any of the other contiguous sleeve construction patterns that I've worked. So it was also like a little bit different. I don't know. This was a little bit of a chaos project, but I'm really happy with the way that it's turning out so far. So I've knit one double knit button band, and I need to pick up the stitches for the second one with the buttonhole. I totally foresee this becoming like a closet staple for me, and I have a decent amount of DK weight yarn in my stash, or I can use like fingering weight yarns held double, or make a scrappy version. There's just honestly so many possibilities for this, because I think it's just like a very wearable shape for me. I'm also like really interested in seeing how the neckline turns out, because I feel like a lot of the cardigan patterns I've either knit or like I was looking at, the neckline is a little bit lower than I would like. Like I really want like a true crew neck, and I feel like a lot of them start maybe like a little bit lower, or they sag down from the weight of the fabric if they're made in like a heavier yarn. But this is like a heavy DK yarn, I would say. They technically market it as worsted, but I would honestly say not even heavy DK. It's like a true DK. So the yarn that I'm using, let me grab it. I have exactly one ball left. I was afraid I was gonna run out of yarn, but looks like I'll be okay. So I'm using Retro Zaria Rosa Pomar Brusca, which is the same yarn that I used for my Ava cardigan. And this is another yarn that I purchased at the New Jersey Wool Walk. I found it for 40% off at Knit Tapestry because they're discontinuing the yarn at the store, not like the brand is discontinuing it. And this is the color 16B, which is just like the plain black color. It is quite rusticy. It is a 2-ply yarn, and it definitely does plump up after you wash it. I will say, if you are looking for a true black cardigan, or like true black yarn, the color on this is true black. However, it has so much vegetation in it that when you have like the knitted fabric, it almost looks like there's like white speckles in it. There's just that much vegetation. I have spent so much time going in with tweezers and just manually picking out all the vegetation, because typically like vegetation in yarn does not bother me. I have already used this yarn for another project in a different color, and it didn't bother me there because it worked with the colorway. But because I wanted this to be like a true black sweater, having like all those white flecks just wasn't working. So that is just a word of warning if you decide to use this colorway in this yarn. Even in terms of rustic yarn, there's definitely a spectrum, and I would definitely put this on the more rusticy side than like other non-superwash rusticy yarns. So yeah, that is this cardigan. Hopefully this will also be finished up rather soon, because it's really just a bunch of double knitting I have to do. And I have to decide on the buttons. I have a few different button options because I am indecisive. And sometimes I also forget that I bought buttons for a project, and then I'm like, I buy them again. And I just have a button collection now. Okay, and then my last cardigan project, also like my last garment WIP, is another cardigan that I have self-drafted. This one has a more contiguous sleeve. Isn't uncommon, but it's definitely not as common as this construction. So this one I'm knitting as a modified drop shoulder slash set-in sleeve. So what I mean by that is it is basically a drop shoulder construction. However, I did do a little bit of armhole shaping, which means that when I knit the sleeve, I will be knitting a sleeve cap. So I feel like the difference between a modified drop shoulder slash set in sleeve slash set in sleeve slash drop shoulder. A true drop shoulder, like the sleeve will start further down on the arm, and then a true set-in sleeve, you will be setting it in, as in you will be knitting the sleeve separately and then mattress stitching or Kitchener or however, you will be seaming the sleeve in basically. And by drop shoulder slash set-in sleeve modified drop shoulder slash set-in sleeve, what I mean is that I am still working at drop shoulder, so it will still start, the sleeve will still start a little bit further down my sleeve. However, because there is a little bit of armhole shaping, it will not start as far down. Hopefully that was not too convoluted. If you have knit like what is it, sweater number 23, which I've knit 3 times at this point, it has that sort of construction. Except this is a crew neck cardigan that I'm knitting once again. Basically, I just feel like knitting a bunch of crew neck cardigans that I'm just self-drafting, so I have a better understanding how different sweater constructions work. And also, I feel like I just wasn't really finding like plain DK8 patterns. They all just had like something other going on, or they were a little bit heavier. I am in the middle of the row, which is why it's a little bit harder to show, but I took like a flat lay of it earlier this week, so I will show it. This one was very, very easy to write out because the construction, there's just like so many resources online in how to write yourself a drop shoulder sweater. So that is what I did. And I think after I figured out my numbers with the contiguous sleeve construction, it made it much easier for me to figure out numbers for this, because I also knew like certain measurements that I liked. Like I knew what I wanted my yoke depth to be, what I wanted the upper arm circumference to be. Obviously, it's going to be a little bit different on this versus the contiguous sleeve construction because they start at different points of my arm, but I had the knowledge to know like where on my arm I would measure to get that. I feel like I keep talking about these other resources, so I will link them below. Another resource that I found very helpful is, I think it's like the Craft Council as well as Isolde. Both of them have these vast charts that tell you standard measurements for each size. So while I did measure myself, I also was just looking at these standard measurements to see that they were more or less in line, because what if I just measured something completely off? And then there were also some measurements that are maybe like kind of hard to measure on myself and I couldn't exactly tell what I wanted it to be. So those charts were very, very helpful in that case. So yeah, this is my other self-drafted cardigan. And this one I decided not to steek only because I was less sure if I wanted to keep this as a cardigan. Like maybe I would just switch my mind and be like, oh wait, I actually want it to be a pullover. Because the thing is, if you steek something, you are pretty committed to that project, because otherwise you will be left with a lot of tiny pieces of yarn. And the yarn that I'm using for this is actually an acquisition. I'll talk about it now since we're in this section. This is an almost used up ball of yarn. This is Gepard Garn Woollia in the blood orange colorway. And this is the exact same colorway that My Favorite Things Knitwear uses for cardigan number 9. It's the one with the saddle shoulder construction, and I have knit it twice. And I remember seeing this yarn last year when I was at Knit in like the suburbs of London, or like outer London. I don't know what the proper terminology for the area is. This yarn is not readily available in the US, but I was in Montreal at the start of this month and I stopped at Espace Tricot. I literally already knew this was the yarn that I wanted before I even went on my trip. I was like, this is the yarn I want. This is the yarn I'm buying. This is going to be my souvenir yarn. And here it is. And it is technically available in the US, but it's a little bit cheaper if you purchase it from overseas or out of the country, not overseas. Well, overseas or out of the country, and or. The color is really, really pretty. It's like a nice orangey red. I have a number of red sweaters and some red yarn stash, but I don't think I have anything this color. Like even though the sun is going down and it's getting dark, on my viewfinder, this is still so punchy and bright. And I've just been squeezing this into this little like Ipsy bag that I usually use for sock projects, but it squeezes in. I took this to watch Jurassic Park. I was knitting in the park earlier this weekend on it. Tiny bag is very, very useful for making it a portable project. Okay, so that's the end of my garment trips. Like I said, it's just been cardigans. All the cardigans. I do want to make some summer garments, maybe 1 or 2. Maybe that will be a next podcast / my planning video. But I do have one more knitting WIP. Let me grab it. I have not knit on this project in over a month, but I'll still talk about it because it's never been on the podcast and it is technically a WIP. So this is the Anthe Shawl by Natasha Hornby. It's a fairly straightforward pattern. You are basically working sections of a rib where you are increasing, and then you have these like mosaic color work sections. And I remember this is one of the first shawls I ever wanted to knit when I first started knitting, but I was so intimidated by it that I never started it. And then I think it was like Memorial Day weekend, and I was having like a cast on party. I cast on the Miffy, I cast on my JMP cardigan, and I decided to cast on this shawl as well. And I think I really only worked on it that week, and then I haven't worked on it since. That's okay. It will eventually get done. I really, really like the colors. So for the white, I'm using Retrosaria Rosa Pomar Mondim, which is technically a sock yarn, but I am afraid of knitting socks with no nylon because I have knit socks with no nylon in a superwash yarn, and I just feel like they are wearing through it very quickly. Even though this is technically marketed as a sock yarn, I just will no longer be knitting socks without nylon. So that is my white color. I will either have to buy a second ball of this, or I've been thinking of mixing in this Brooklyn Tweed Peary because I randomly have a skein of it. I don't remember what I purchased this for, but the colors are similar enough. I was thinking that if I like alternated them in, maybe I could get away with it. We'll see. This yarn in and of itself isn't that expensive, and it's like pretty readily available. The dye lots will obviously be different, but it's a cream color, so I think it will be fine. And then my two contrast colors. Here are my two contrast colors. They are Skinny Yana by Amano Yarns. I'm fairly certain it's a discontinued yarn, which is a shame because it has a lovely color range. It is Peruvian Highland wool, but it feels so soft. Like it could totally be a merino. The colors are just really, really, really pretty. I don't remember the names of the colors on my head off the top of my head, but they'll be on the screen somewhere. I want to say one of them is like flamingo. This pink I used in my wave sweater, but I still had a lot of it left, so that's why I'm using it in this shawl. And sadly enough, the shawl that I had as a finished object in my last episode, the traveler shawl, which I gifted to my mom, she loved the shawl, and then she took it on vacation, and now the shawl is missing. She doesn't remember if she brought it home or not, so it's either lost somewhere in Quebec or it is lost somewhere in her closet. But either way, she is now down a shawl, so I will most likely be giving this to her whenever I finish it. I don't really have a deadline in place. It's still at that point where it is enjoyable knitting, but I know just like a few rows later when the number of stitches reaches, I feel like after the stitch count, after the stitches per row past 200, that's when shawl knitting is no longer appealing. So I will just be taking this project nice and slow and steady. I really, really like how the colors are coming out. Okay, that is it for all my knitting. However, I do have my first crochet WIP. I accidentally moved my camera a little, so apologies if like there has been a shift. I have been wanting to learn how to crochet very soon after I started learning how to knit. Like I was looking through my YouTube search history, and literally every single summer I looked up some sort of crochet tutorial, and it just never clicked for me until now. I was just sitting down one Friday night, and I was like, I want to learn how to crochet. I really want to learn how to crochet. And I decided to give the 6-Day Blanket by Betty McKnit a try. It was the blanket of the TikTok drama last year. However, it has quite a thorough YouTube tutorial, and the way that she explained it, it just happened to click for me. And now I can proudly say I know how to crochet as well as knit. When I first started this project, I was absolutely fixated on it. I worked on it for like a week and then I lost steam. However, I would love to get this blanket done at some point over the summer. So this is the 6-Day Star Blanket by Betty McKnit. As you can tell, I cannot fit it on the screen because it is already quite large. When people say that crocheting goes quicker than knitting, even though I am an absolute newbie at crocheting, I feel like I'm still able to create a much larger fabric more quickly with crochet than I am with knitting. I am using quite a large hook, but even then. And it's just so fun and meditative. I will say I feel like this is totally a beginner-friendly project. There's no like overly complicated stitches in this. You have cluster stitches, which means hopefully I could figure out how to crochet a granny square pretty easily. Wait, what is happening? Sorry, I just want to make sure I'm like not dropping a stitch. It's quite a beginner friendly pattern. I think I only had to look up like 1 or 2 outside tutorials on this project because the tutorial for the actual project was thorough enough. The stitches in this, you have single crochet, double crochet, and then there are some cluster stitches. And I honestly do think my knitting knowledge helped me in learning how to crochet, because I remember in the past, one of the most confusing parts of crochet for me was I just didn't know where to insert a hook. Like, it just looked like string to me, whereas in knitting, it's very clear to me. Like, I know where to put my knitting needle in. But when I was looking at crochet through the lens of knitting, it was much easier for me to understand the anatomy of a crochet stitch. So like when I look at the top of this, it looks very similar to like a slip stitch edge in knitting. And it just clicked for me. Like, I was able to understand way better where my crochet hook is supposed to go. And yes, this is my first ever crochet WIP, first ever crochet project. I don't know how big this blanket will end up being. I think I finished, or I'm finishing my 4th pattern repeat, which is supposed to be like a crib size blanket. But I'd really like this to be like a full size blanket that I can use on the couch that will cover me basically. Like, I can go like this and it will cover my arms and my legs. Like, I just want to be like a starfish covered in this blanket. I'm only on yarn ball number 2, and I bought 4 balls of this total. So this is the Karen Blossom Cake. Another exciting part of being able to crochet, not only can I make blankets more, I think, easily than knitting. Like, knitting blankets look stunning, but I feel like they just look like they'll take forever. Not that this isn't always also taking forever, but I don't know. In my mind, like, crochet and blanket go more hand in hand than knit and blanket. I'm not saying I'm never going to knit a blanket, but it is what it is. I just distracted myself. Another exciting thing about learning how to crochet is I feel like now I can use these Karen Blossom Cakes, because I never wanted to knit a blanket with them because it just felt like too laborsome. But like I said, in my mind, crochet and blanket go hand in hand. So I had an excuse to finally purchase this yarn. And this is a cotton acrylic blend. It's 61% cotton, 39% acrylic. It is also a blown yarn construction, and it has like the color changing, as you can see. I think this yarn is so freaking pretty. I think it's perfect for this type of project. I also saw some people making a like step-by-step raglan sweater in this yarn. Really pretty, really solid price point. I think each ball is like $12 at Michael's, and I bought it when there was like a 30% off or 40% off coupon. And then I also mixed in this other yarn because I really wanted to try it. It's this tube yarn from Michael that's also a cotton acrylic blend. Let me grab a ball of it. Here is a yarn that I've been adding in I only added 1 contrast stripe, but I want to add in a few more. It is Cuddle Craft Tube from Michael's Loops and Threads brand. It's 75% cotton, 25% nylon, and it is this like interesting tube construction. It looks like honestly reminds me of like an I-cord. Like, the outside is just a knit tube, and then on the inside, let me see if I can find the end of the yarn. So the outside is a color, and then the inside, it's like some polyester filling. I think that's the 25% nylon or polyester or whatever it is. And interestingly enough, ever since I learned how to crochet, I've been really enjoyed looking at crochet inspo. And when I was searching crochet on Essence, I found this Bottega bag that is crocheted. And honestly, whatever like yarn they used looks so similar to this like Cuddlecraft tube yarn. So if you wanted to crochet yourself a Bottega inspired bag, you could totally do so with this yarn. Just saying. And speaking of crochet, I feel like I have mixed feelings, and I know like a lot of people have mixed feelings about crochet garments. However, I really, really love the look of filet crochet, and just like fingering weight crochet garments for summer, I think are just chef's kiss, and I would love to filet crochet something. I'm really excited to explore crocheting more. That is the end of the whips. I do have some acquisitions. Let's see. I'll talk about the first one. So most of my trip to Canada was spent in Quebec City, and people were very kind on Instagram and gave me a bunch of recommendations. There is this one yarn store in downtown Quebec that is closing that people recommended me visiting. It was literally a 10-minute walk from my hotel, but I just wasn't able to go because I was in Quebec City for 4 full days, and then there's like the 2 travel days on opposite of that. And on the 4 full days I was there, they were closed on 3 of the days. And then the one day that they were open, I just was in a completely different part of the city, and just getting there and back didn't work with my plan, so I wasn't able to go there. However, I was able to visit another yarn store, which was Madeline, a gorgeous yarn store. Is very, very big and spacious, and I think when I was visiting, they were also having a summer sale, so they had a bunch of cool yarns on sale. They had a bunch of Nora on sale, and I'm not gonna lie, I was tempted to come home with a sweater quantity of Nora, but your girl held out. I showed some self-control because I didn't really have plans for that yarn, and I just came home with a sock set. I'm not going to lie, part of the reason I bought this sock set is because I'm obsessed with the label. It's just so pretty. It's like this stamped bunny, and it's totally going in my journal. So this is a sock set from Lilo, and it is in the color Lee's a Jacob. It's a pretty standard 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon. This is a 25-gram mini and a 100-gram mini hank. And I just really love how like subtle the sparkles are. Like, I just think the colors in this look so good together. It's like a pinky, purpley main skein with kind of like rainbow confetti sparkles. Not sparkles, speckles, with this like very spring greeny color. And technically I wasn't supposed to be buying a more hand-dyed yarn, hand-dyed sock yarn, because I have quite a bit in stash, and I told myself I don't really need like more speckly hand-dyed yarns, but this was a special yarn. It's souvenir yarn, so it's different. It doesn't count. I would have loved to buy some Canadian wool, but I just really wasn't finding any at the stores that I was going to. I think Espace Tricot did have some, but it wasn't a sweater quantity in the color that I wanted. So I came home with this, and then the Gepard Garn Bulia that I already talked about. I think I talked about it in the beginning, but I also thrifted some yarn. I've never thrifted some yarn before, only because every time I go to the thrift store, literally all they have is acrylic that's either really, really old, or it's just more expensive than if I bought it new. So it holds no appeal to me. But the last time I was at the thrift store, I found some Madeline Tosh yarn, and it was actually in a colorway that I had really, really wanted a few years ago. So I thought it was like a sign, it was meant to be. However, I don't have it with me because I've been like freezing it and then putting it outside and then freezing it. And yeah, basically I am paranoid about getting bugs. So I have an abundance of caution when dealing with this yarn. I think finally today it's like really, really hot outside, that the yarn is well and truly baking in the black trash bag that it's in. So I'm going to put it in the back of the freezer again, and then I'm finally going to wash it. And then I think it should be okay. I'm unsure what I'm going to do with that yarn. I was thinking I want to make some other sort of blanket project. I haven't decided. I know I went on that whole spiel about, oh, blankets are perfect for crochet, but then I was also looking at some knit blankets. Basically, I do think I want to make another blanket, and hopefully that yarn will be going into a said blanket. There's just so many good blanket patterns on Ravelry. So that is the end of my knitting and crochet content. If you want to stick around for the sewing content, keep watching. If you don't, thank you so much for watching. It has been so long since I recorded a video, so truly from the bottom of my heart, thanks for coming back and checking out this video. As always, I would love to know what you are working on, because I'm nosy. Maybe I want to make what you're making. I want to be influenced. My knitting mojo has kind of been like up and down, so maybe somebody has a really cool pattern that'll be like, oh my god, I need to make that immediately. And hope to see you again next time. Bye. If you want to hear about my sewing, let's talk sewing. So I do have a few finished objects. I feel like when it comes to sewing, I have a little bit of decision paralysis, kind of the same way with knitting. When it comes to knitting, there's so many different things I want to make, but I've already made so many things that I feel like my decision paralysis is not as bad. Whereas with sewing, there's just so much that I don't know, so much I haven't tried, that sometimes I get a little bit stuck. Like this weekend, I really wanted to do some sewing. I did not do anything because I just couldn't make up my mind on what I wanted to do. That said, I do have a few finished objects. I made most of these. I made most of these before my vacation, because ideally I had wanted to sew a lot more for my vacation, but I started too late, and then I also had said decision paralysis. So finished object number 1 is what I'm wearing, and I actually have, this is my third time sewing this. It is the picnic set pattern by Caden Naughton. I really, really love this pattern, and I really, really like repeating things, repeating sewing things, because I feel like I learn something each time. Like when I look at my third version of this compared to my first version of this that I sewed last summer, it is like a night and day. That's not to say this version is perfect or there aren't improvements I could make, because 100% there are. But this version just, it looks so much better, and I'm so much more proud of it. And even though I've had this for a month, I feel like I know I've definitely gotten more wear out of this month-old version versus the version that I've had for a year. I feel like this is a very beginner friendly pattern, because I was a beginner last summer and I'm still a beginner now, and I find this to be beginner friendly. So it has like a raglan like construction. You have elastic in the neckline, you have elastic in the sleeves. So the sizing on it is like very loosey goosey, airy, flowy. So you don't have to worry about it fitting exactly right. I feel like on this version, my finishings are also a lot cleaner, and I also added in this little modification where I have these like little bow tie closures on the sleeves, and let me show you the matching shorts I made. I'm not wearing them. Okay, the reason it's called the picnic set is because it also has a matching pair of bloomers or shorts. There's 3 different views of the top, and then there's, I believe, 2 different views. Might be 3 different views for the shorts as well. I don't remember off the top of my head. I think I made view C for the shorts because there's basically like an additional ruffly section that you add on to the bottom. The shorts I did not do as well of a job as the top, because I think the first shorts I made view A, which was more straightforward, and I made those a long time ago, and they are not very good. I did not do a good job sewing them, but while this is not as well done as the top, I still think it is an improvement over my previous version. And they're just like very, very cute. They kind of look like underwear. They kind of look like the pantaloons that Elizabethan men would wear. Like whenever I wear these, I feel like I'm like, oh, I need to get some doubloons. I don't know. I also modified these to have these little like bow tie closures on the side, and I just think they're very, very cute, and it's perfect when it's like 90 degrees outside. The fabric that I use for both of these is this just like very simple cotton fabric. I don't know. I'm still learning different types of fabric. Like there's cotton lawn, cotton voile. I don't know the difference, but this is a very, very light bordering on sheer cotton fabric with like this. It's not a true block print because I think it's like machine made that my parents bought me in India. So like faux block print cotton fabric. That's what I made. And I still have some fabric left over. I don't know how much, maybe like a meter. I do think I shortened the dress a little bit because I am quite short. One thing I will have to improve for my next version, because I'm sure I will knit this again. I will sew this again. So one thing I've noticed that I really like the more I'm sewing, the more I'm realizing my likes and dislikes. I really like a piece with like a deep hem. I feel like it adds structure and volume to a piece. So I have been doing that on a lot of the pieces, especially because I'm short. It's just an easy way for me to hem something without having to cut the fabric. I've been noticing on ready-to-wear pieces when they have a deep hem, they don't have 2 lines of sewing. They only have 1 line of sewing. So let's see if we can show this without like flashing you guys. I have this, kind of hard to see because it's black. Okay, there. So I folded over the fabric, right? And then I have this top line of sewing over here, which goes over the folded fabric, but then I also sewed a line toward the fold. And I noticed when looking at ready-to-wear pieces, like they don't do that second line of sewing. They just have the 1 line of sewing. So I don't know if that's like a cost saving measure that they don't need to sew a second line of sewing, or if it's like a visual thing. The next time I make this pattern, I will only try sewing 1 line and see how I like the look of it. I do really like that deep hem though. My next sewing finished object is another all black Oops, is another all black piece, and I'm obsessed with this skirt. I sewed this last weekend and I've already worn it 3 times. But it is the Le Ciotat skirt by Sewing Therapy. It's this wrap skirt and it has these like tummy and hip panels. It kind of has like a drop waist to it, and then you have these bias tape ties. There's 2 rows of ties. There's a top tie and a bottom tie. This skirt is just so comfortable, so versatile, so wearable. You can wear it high-waisted, you can wear it low-waisted because of the tie nature of it. Like the waist and hip circumference are adjustable. It was a very, very easy sew. The only thing I think I had to change is that I have, again, this one has an even deeper hem. Like my hem goes up to here. I think I have like a 4-inch hem because it's drafted for somebody who is 5'4" and I'm only 5'1". The only complaint I have about this pattern is there were some parts of the pattern where I wish the designer was a little bit more specific. Maybe like if, oh no, shredded some of my sewing on the bias tape. I thought I caught it on something yesterday. Anyways, what was I saying? My one complaint is there were a few sections of the pattern that I felt were a little vague. Maybe somebody who is more of an experienced sewist would not have this problem. Like they would just know what to do. But because I am a beginner and this is marketed as a beginner-friendly pattern, I will make the complaints. One is when you are folding over the like edging, it doesn't tell you how much to fold over. Like in other patterns, like for instance, in this picnic set pattern, it'll say like fold over like 1/4 inch and then fold over 1/2 inch. Whereas on this pattern, it just says fold over twice. So does that mean I fold over the seam allowance? I don't know. It didn't specify. So I think folded over 1/4 inch and then 1/2 inch. I don't remember. I just did the same thing on both sides and I wish that was specified. And then my other complaint is there is a point, where is that part of the skirt? So there's a point where you are sewing on your straps and the top strap obviously like it goes towards the top, but then for the bottom strap, there's just like a little diagram that shows you, oh, sew it onto the bottom, but like how far from the bottom? Is it 1/4 inch? Is it 1/2 inch? Is it 3/8 of a centimeter? Like how far from the bottom are you supposed to sew it? So again, I just made up my own measurement to make sure that it was on the same. It was the same on both sides, but I wish the pattern had specified exactly where to sew it. Again, maybe it was just assumed that you're supposed to use the distance of the seam allowance, but as I am a beginner, I don't know if that is standard or not. And for this pattern, I just used some black cotton poplin. I'm fairly certain I got from Joann's. And then some ready-made bias tape. I think that's part of the reason why this project ended up being so enjoyable for me, because I don't enjoy making bias tape, and because this was just like a plain black, I was able to use a plain black bias tape, and that saved me a lot of time. And this is totally a skirt I see myself making over in other colors. I think a patchwork version of this would be so cool as well. There's definitely a trend here. Like everything I sewed is a bottom. I do want to sew some tops, but the decision paralysis. My next sewing finished object is, again, a finished object-ish because I do want to replace parts of it. So this is the Henrietta skirt by Spaghetti Western Sewing. I have also been wanting to sew this one forever, and I modified this one by sewing. This is like a pretty common modification that people make, and the designer also includes it in the pattern. So the way that this skirt is constructed, you have 2 side panels and then a front panel and a back panel that are exactly the same. Instead of cutting out 2 side panels and 2 front and back panels, I just cut out 4 side panels. So the whole skirt has this like V shape. You basically have like 4 V's all the way around, and it's kind of like inspired by this Sandy Liang skirt. She also has like dresses and stuff with the same silhouette, and I really liked the versions of the skirt that I had seen on Instagram that do that, so I decided to do the same thing. And then I also added in some waist ties. However, I was really lazy and I basically used the edges of the fabric and just serged it, and it looks very sloppy. So I bought some white bias tape, and I'm just going to make some simple bias tape ties to replace this like scraggly looking ties. And this was a thrift flip. This is actually a bed sheet that I got at the thrift store. It was like a Pottery Barn sheet. I think I got it for like $3 or $4, and I turned it into this gorgeous skirt. And the only problem I had with this is I feel like every time I wash it, I've washed it twice so far, it just gets all wrinkly. And then when I'm trying to iron it, I feel like I can't get out all the wrinkles. But then when I see it on the hanger, I'm like, oh, it looks okay if it's a little bit. It's also a little bit sheer. So I've been thinking of how I can sew in a lining without undoing the waistband. Worst case scenario, I might just undo the waistband to sew in a lining because it's not 100% see-through, but if it's like a really sunny day and I'm wearing colorful underwear, you would totally be able to see my underwear. But this is another pattern I see myself making again. I think with sewing, with my knitting this year, I feel like this year and last year, I've been definitely more open to making things again, but even more so with my sewing, because while sewing projects obviously do take up time, it's nowhere near as much time as a knitting project. So I'm definitely more open to remaking things in sewing patterns. I'm also like looking forward to learning more about modifying patterns, because I feel like because sewing patterns are so much more expensive than knitting patterns, before I buy a pattern, I try to see like if I have something similar or if I want something similar that I could buy a certain pattern and then have that pattern and modify it to be like another pattern. But that is all a learning process. Overall, really, really happy with the skirt. And again, it has a deep hem. My last sewing project is my first pair of pants. First pair of handmade pants. These are the pants from the Matchy Matchy Sewing Club ruffle brunch set. Low-key, they're kind of like a clown pants because one, I cut out a size 3 sizes too big because I printed out a larger size because I really don't like when pants are tight around my tummy. So I had thought to maybe go up a size on like the waist and then just like taper it down to a smaller size on the bottom. But by the time I got around to like cutting out the fabric, I completely forgot that. So it's a much bigger size than I had initially planned to make. And then also when I was cutting it out, I was like, wow, the rise on these is really, really high. But I had never made a pair of pants myself before. So I didn't want to modify it and then it ends up being unwearable. So instead I made this version, and now I know, yes, this rise way too high for me. And next time I will look up a YouTube tutorial on how to shorten the rise of a pair of pants. But other than all that, I'm still very happy with the way pants came out because it is an elastic waist. Even though the legs are much, much wider than I wanted, the elasticity at the waist just pulls them in and they still fit. I also modified them to have these like little pin tucks, which were fun to learn how to sew. I think the next time I decide to do pin tucks, I will make them a little bit shorter. These ones are a little bit wider, but that's okay. The pants are very, very able to wear. I've worn them to the movies. I've worn them like outside in the backyard so the mosquitoes don't eat me alive. They're a great pair of airy summer pants. And the fabric I used for this is a cotton poplin with a little bit of stretch that I got from Joann. So I think this was my first time sewing with a fabric that has some spandex in it. It had very little. It's like 3 or 4%, but it's enough that it did like affect my sewing experience. I don't know how I can show it. It's like it stretches this way. But I did notice that when I was like putting the fabric under my machine, I'm like, oh wait, it's like pulling a little bit. So that was a learning experience. And I did buy a decent amount of this fabric when Joann's was closing. So I want to make a matching top, and then I think I'll still have a few yards left over. So I think I bought like 6 yards of this fabric. I started making a shirt top as a matching top, but I really hate shirring, it turns out. So we'll see what happens with that. And again, this is a pattern I definitely see myself making again. I really like this pattern because it came with pants, and then it tells you how to modify the pants to be short as well as and the pants also came with like a little ruffle on the bottom, which I didn't feel like adding to this version, but I could see myself making a future version with the ruffles at the bottom. My camera died My camera turned off from overheating while recording the last section, but I think I was done talking about my sewing. And I believe my next video will be about my summer making plans, knitting mostly, a little bit of crochet, and maybe I'll talk about sewing. Do you want to hear about sewing plans or no? Let me know. And then I also want to make another video, a follow-up of last year's video about different vintage knitting patterns, and I'll talk about like the inspiration from wherever. Last year's video had like some inspiration from art, inspiration from ready-to-wear pieces, inspiration from just like color palettes and yarns in my stash, so that I can hopefully pick a pattern that I can knit for Rhinebeck this year. And if you are interested in seeing any of those videos, feel free to follow along. And if you enjoyed this video, please feel free to give it a thumbs up. As always, I would love to know what you are working on while watching this video because I am nosy, and also maybe I can be influenced by whatever you are making, knitting, crocheting, sewing, whatever other fun crafty things there are. That is truly a wrap on this video. Thanks again for watching. Hope to see you again next time. Happy making. Bye.